So, while we all love the New Zealand honey industry, we're not the only industry perhaps that relies on the exports of the majority being a single variety. So with that sort of brief comment, I'd like to introduce Chris Yorke. And Chris is from the New Zealand wine industry. He's the Global Marketing Director of New Zealand Wine Growers, which represents 700 wineries and 850 grape growers here in New Zealand. He's responsible for the global marketing of the New Zealand wine brand, and New Zealand exports $1.75 billion of wine to over 80 countries annually. So he's here to tell us about the lessons learned in becoming a leading global marketer of New Zealand wine and the takeout for the New Zealand honey industry. Chris.
Welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me. I think it's a bit of an arrogant title. I didn't actually make the title up, but I will talk about New Zealand wine marketing. But it is a journey, and I've been in New Zealand Wine Growers as the Global Marketing Director for 15 years, and there's quite a few things we've learnt on our journey, and I think there's probably worth sharing a couple of those things. So, just want to talk about a little bit who we are and where New Zealand wine is in the market, and then just some of the things that we do. If we don't have time for questions after the presentation, I'll be here at the front, so if anybody wants to ask any individual questions, I'm happy to do so. So first of all, who are we? New Zealand Wine Growers is a joint body of the grape growers and the winemakers. So we have about 800 grape growers and 700 wineries, and we joined together about 15 years ago as a single organisation, and that's unique in the wine world. Most wine countries have either grape growers organisations or winemaker organisations, and of course there's a inherent potential conflict between those two. So what we did was to join the organisation together. And actually last year we then created one entity where everybody is just a member. You're a member of New Zealand Wine Growers. What do? We speak to government. Advocacy. So government does not want to speak to 1,500 people. They want somebody who does that work for them and says, here's what we as an industry think. It's really important. Trade deals, free trade agreements, sale of alcohol, etc. They want to have, what is the industry view? So that's part of our role. Research, New Zealand is a unique country in terms of growing grapes. It is also for our wines, our olives, etc. So we research what is it that makes New Zealand, our place, special. How does New Zealand affect New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, for example? So we try and explain, but we have a real strong so what, as in they call the grape days. So it's not just doing research, it's actually saying, so what does this mean for you now? And they're as well attended as these sort of events. Sustainability, it's a core part of New Zealand's positioning as a country, and it's a core part of our industry. So we have over 95% of our industry is in some sort of externally audited sustainability scheme. And marketing. So marketing's the bit I head up. It's about half the organisation. We have offices, I'm based in Auckland, we have offices in London, New York, Toronto, San Francisco, and Shanghai. So where is New Zealand in the wine world? The average price of wine exported around the world is that number in the middle, $3.12, so $3 Our cousins across the ditch are at $2.26. They produce a lot, but at lower prices. We can never compete with countries like Australia in volume. We have to compete on quality and have higher pricing. So you can see New Zealand average price is $5.39. France includes champagne, so if you strip out champagne, normally New Zealand or France are competing to be the highest average price wine country in each of the markets. Cannot stress that enough. We cannot compete on price. We have to compete on quality. So this is a gratuitous graph because it shows when I started, which was here, and we're at 1.8 billion. So my first press release was for $300 million of exports. We just did one last week for 1.8 billion. A very small part of that was actually to do with me. Mostly it was because of our wineries are focused on producing great wines consistently and working together, and that is a key point to export. So overall strategy, we want to be known for our exceptional wines. As I said, we cannot make cheap wines. We have to make the best we can. 700 wineries in New Zealand produce as much wine as one winery in Australia. So who's got the better cost of goods, right? We can't compete on price. We have to compete and make the best quality that we can. Now, we're a member organisation. I'm going to mention the L word, levy. We're funded by a levy. Gives us about $10 million to do what we do. So as a levy-funded organisation, we have to create enduring value for our members, and that's something I'm focused on every day, is demonstrating that value of the money I get from our members. And key is protecting and enhancing the reputation of New Zealand wine. As an industry body, we can do stuff that individual wineries can't do, which is actually really ensure that we've got that reputation in the market and tell people about it. And supporting value growth of New Zealand wine. It's really important. There's a winemaker in Palliser Estate, Richard Riddiford, who recently died, unfortunately. He was a real character, but he said, our job is to chase the money. Who can afford to spend $20 on a bottle of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc? Who can afford to spend the price that you're asking for your honey? And that changes, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it was Russia, China, Eastern Europe, North America. So who can afford to buy our product? If we're trying to produce the best product we can, who can afford to buy it? And then what are we going to do? And never put all your eggs in one basket. How do we do that? A lot of it's about information. So when I saw your theme for the conference, I thought, awesome. It's like information and growing value. That's exactly what we focus on. So once you've sort of worked out what you want to do, you've got to tell a story. So what is the New Zealand wine story? What's the New Zealand honey story? So when I came into the job 15 years ago, we had another logo. We'd not done any research into the brand. So the first thing we did was we actually went around to each of the key markets and said, what do you think of New Zealand wine? What do you think the opportunities are? What are the risks? And if you were to use words to describe New Zealand wine, what would you use? So that came back, synthesized it all, and that came into our positioning statement, so around pure discovery. So the insight there was with premium wine drinkers. They wanted to discover our wines, and they wanted to be the person who brought their wines, so New Zealand wines to their group. And pure is a real good descriptor of things we do in New Zealand, but also of our wines. It's a good descriptor of our wines. So again, what is it that differentiates New Zealand honey from others? And we had a big thing around Sauvignon Blanc, which anybody in the world can make, and New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, or Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. What is it that differentiates our Sauvignon Blanc here that could be grown anywhere in the world? I know there's all sorts of discussions you're having around Manuka, but to me there's a New Zealand Manuka. If other people are grabbing it, they can't grab New Zealand. Nobody can grab that. So own that positioning in terms of what does New Zealand mean. So for us, Our brand, 3 things. Premium. We are either the most expensive, the second most expensive wine country, the key markets that we work in. We're sustainable, we care about our land, and we're planning in the future to look after it. But also, when 80% of our exports are one varietal, Sauvignon Blanc, we have to talk about the diversity, actually, of our other wines that we do. Because we make amazing Chardonnay, we make amazing Pinot Noir, we make amazing Syrah. And we also have to talk about our different regions. So we have 10 regions from Northlands down to Central Otago. So you might have a hero brand, for us, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, but we can go into lots of other stories as well, and you have to go into those stories. So the key things we do, one is education, and what we're trying to do there is increase engagement with our trade and media. We bring international visitors to New Zealand, and we want to use them to influence their networks. Our market information to our members is crucial. How many people can afford the latest Nielsen report on the UK market? Right? So I go and buy it, I pay a premium, and then it's on our members' site. And so we sort of work through how to do that. And finally, a new thing in wine tourism, so I'll talk to you about that as well. But then you've got to look at where you're going to grow. So we divide our markets into sort of 3 types. The more mature, Australia, UK, New Zealand. New Zealand is a market. We've been very focused on domestic, on exports. There's only 4 million people here, but in the end, you've got to still do something in the domestic market. Then you've got and that's where you've got New Zealand wine is as a category is recognised. You see New Zealand wine if you go into a shop. So I don't know how it is for you. Is it New Zealand honey, or how does that work? What's that definition? Where we're really growing the category. US is our largest market now. A lot of cooperation. When you produce less than 1% of the world's wine, and you are one of the 300 wineries going to export your wines, how much bandwidth have you got with the people you're talking to? And then the next guy comes, the next lady comes from New Zealand. You've got to work together overseas. You've got to work together. We're too small. Got to work together. And that's been the foundation of the New Zealand wine industry, is cooperation. And then we've got the newer markets, and we have done some work with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise in China and in Eastern European countries as well, or Central European countries as well. So looking at some of those activities, we set up offices overseas quite early on. When I joined, we had an office in London, and then a few helpers in other markets. And we now have offices, as I said, in about 5 different countries. But the key thing for those offices is to identify the influencers in those markets who we can then bring to New Zealand. So what we do, and this is what we've just done, and this looks horrendous, I'm just trying to show you the logistics. We brought 80 of the world's top wine media and trade to New Zealand in January, February. And we brought them, the invite was for the Sauvignon Blanc celebration in Marlborough. So all the trade and media came to that. But then we said, well, actually, you're lifestyle media. So we're going to take you to Northland, which is going to celebrate the 200th anniversary of the first planting of New Zealand vines this year, and Nelson, and then we'll take you down there. Or your wine media, and we'll take you to Central Otago, and then other places. So we built this quite complex system to meet the needs of all of those visitors, but the core, one thing that we invited them to. And we didn't do that just for them to have a lot of fun. We did that for the coverage. So we've targeted the magazines, the websites, the publications, to tell those stories of premium, sustainable, and regional varietal diversity. We tried some new stuff with lifestyle influencers. That was really interesting. Use some of the people in the industry who are known. Sam Neill, for example. Don't be shy of the big guys. The big guys give you reach. You know, it's in wine, it's like, oh yeah, but you know, $12 wine, that's just a bit cheap. $12 wine is still more expensive than most wines sold in the world. It's just not as expensive as some of the wine that we sell. Yeah? I see it when I buy honey. I can buy a $50 pot, I can buy a smaller pot. So the big guys are important because they actually get penetration, and then the small guys give you the sexy stories. And you need both. The big guys need the small guys, and the small guys need the big guys. That's taken us about 20 years to work out. Some of the feedback we get. I was blown away by the respect and collaboration in the wine industry. Something we can all learn from. So that's what people say when they come here. You guys work together. This one I love. Joe Chewinski, who's writes for one of the biggest wine magazines in the States. And he said, New Zealand now has far too many high-quality wines to cover them all in a single issue. Result. All right, so slowly, it's taken again 15 years of him coming to actually be able to grow and grow. This takes time. This doesn't happen overnight. And here, I believe New Zealand is a global leader in sustainability. So it's always bringing it back to what are our messaging, and what are we trying to achieve? So we organised a wine flight. We chartered a plane from Marlborough and we flew all over, so Marlborough, Nelson, Martinborough, Hawke's Bay into Gisborne. And we served a wine on each of as we flew over each region, we served a wine from that region. And Air New Zealand matched it to some food. It's awesome. With wine media, they went nuts. They loved it. Again, so you just got to be creative. You know, show your regions. You know, we've got such beautiful areas of the country where we grow honey. I go to farmers markets as I go around the country, and I taste the honeys. I was in Canterbury recently and in Christchurch, and listening to the stories of your honey is the same as you talk about your honey as we talk about our wine. It's this place. It was this season, you know, this quality. This is what we did. This is our pure, right? You know, you've got heaps of great stories. Now I have to go back to our members and say, well, we spent $750,000 bringing people over to New Zealand, so what do we get for that? So this is what I'm going to be presenting. Well, we got EAV. It's estimated advertising value. If you've got a page in the magazine and it costs $15,000 to put an advert in that magazine, we count that as $15,000 coverage. So the estimated advertising value of all the articles is $3.2 million. We're on platforms that reached over 300 million people. We measure listings, how many new wines, that takes a lot longer to come through. How many regions did we visit? And were people happy with the thing? When you're dealing with other people's money, you have to be very responsive back, so you know what you're getting for your money. But the key thing is you can't get any of this individually, right? You cannot bring that top food writer from the UK to your place. You can't afford it, right? But if that happens and it tells your story, it's going to help all of you. But you can only do that by working together. Education is really important for us, so we're a long way away from most of our markets. Most people haven't been to New Zealand, so we have to bring New Zealand to them overseas. So we run for sommeliers. There's certain. I'm just trying to think what the honey equivalent would be, but people who are, you know, the sommeliers are the specialists. They're the ones who hand sell the wine in the restaurants. So we give them a really deep, quite geeky experience, which most journalists wouldn't like. So. And then we had a Chardonnay and Sparkling Symposium. We organised the first ever wine tasting on a marae this year, which was amazing. And we could only do it because of the history of the missionaries who had landed and actually gone to this marae and planted vines for 2 years and then realised, you're actually not they came back 2 years later and said, "You're not the Hawke's Bay, are you?" I went, "No, we're Gisborne." I went, "Okay, can we just have those vines back?" And then they planted them at the mission. So that's quite a funny story, I thought. But there's a good link that we have with that marae. And then all around the country, around the world, and with our offices, we organise different education. Now, because this is a thing, in the wine world, this is a thing. You sort of go there, you explain the wines, the regions, and talk about them. So you're getting less and less of the key influencers actually going. So what we're doing now is collaborating with other wine countries. So we're the first country to do this. So we're now not only just cooperating with ourselves, we're actually cooperating with some wine countries because we want to grow the premium wine markets in the world. So we're now starting to cooperate with those other people in those markets. And we've run a lot of these things. I have to go back, and I said, in my seminars around the world, I showed 700 different wines from over 200 wineries. Which wines did you use? Any of the wineries can submit their wines into blind tasting. But we want to show the best, right? Do we want to just have a lucky draw in terms of which wines we show? Or do we want to tell a story, and do we have the best wines that we can show? So we sort of have a cut-off point of quality, and then we rotate between all those wines. So it's important that we're not just showing, the 10 best, Felton Road and Craggy Range and stuff, which are awesome wines. But there's a lot of other wines that people haven't heard of that are of a similar quality. And then information, so crucial part of what we do. So we've just completed drone footage, and this is on our website. So I encourage you to go to nzwine.com and have a look. It's a beautiful drone footage, just explaining what is it that makes growing grapes in Waiheke so special. What is it about Gisborne? What is it about Marlborough? So this is creating materials so that when you tell your story, you've sort of had the New Zealand story told, you've had the regional story told, and then you can say, now this is me. This is what we do. Yeah? And it also allows for a consistency. So if media go into the Hawke's Bay and they meet one winery and they say, well, the Hawke's Bay is all about this, and then another winery says, well, actually the Hawke's Bay is all about this, the media is going, what the hell is the Hawke's Bay? All right? So we agree what are our core messages for the region and the sub-regions and the varieties, and then you tell your story. Sauvignon Blanc, we sort of run a global social media campaign. It's in the third year now, which is having amazing results. And we're using influencers around the world, but we're also activating it locally as well. We had Jancis Robinson, who's a wine writer in the UK, and she, again, we did French wines against New Zealand wines, but not against, but just saying, here's Sauvignon Blancs from France and from New Zealand, what do you think? We used to, so this is the journey, we used to go, this is New Zealand, we deserve, and try them against the other wines and say, hey, we're almost as good, because we're establishing ourselves. Now we've got the confidence and we go, I think we deserve to be here. This is our take. This is France's take. And we did it in conjunction with the French. For years we've been fighting the French. So that's I suppose that's maturity as well. We have a whole plethora of information on our member site for each area, and we break it down into growing the grapes, making the wine, or selling the wine. And then what is it that we do that help you grow the grapes, make the wine, sell the wine? And it's all in there. Marketing resources, marketing programs, events programs, toolkits, catalogs, what is Sauvignon Blanc, where's it grown, what's Pinot Noir, where's it grown, what's the Hawke's Bay, what's, talking about regions, and just have, so that we've got a consistent language talking about the industry. And again, that's very popular. We measure on the website, how many times is that downloaded, how many times is it viewed, just to see. We buy some reports. Okay, the report cost 50 grand. We had 300 wineries look at it. Actually, that's pretty good per winery cost. It's a $50,000 report, but as a winery, you can just access it. But we're making sure that people are accessing it. And here's a really exciting new thing I'm really excited about, is wine tourism. So we're now into that space. I just had an email yesterday from Airbnb. Any of you traveled overseas with Airbnb recently? Or rented a place? Any of you gone on the Airbnb experiences when you were there? So when you book the accommodation, it'll then go, hey, you're in Vietnam. There's this cooking course in Ho Chi Minh that you can do. So these experiences are starting to be really important. And experiences in the land, tasting wines and honey, are really starting to become a thing. Because people want to have genuine experiences when they come to a country and meet the people. And the great thing about both of our industries is that there's some really cool people in there, and we're doing really cool stuff in beautiful, amazing places. So we're starting to try and and we know from the wine tourism side that tourists who visit a winery, 27% of all tourists visit a winery. If they are one of those 27%, they will stay longer, spend more, and visit more regions. So that's exactly what Tourism New Zealand is trying to encourage. So we're starting a strategy of how we can help wineries develop products. How do we work with Air New Zealand, Tourism New Zealand? How do we help start promoting this? And I'm preparing and support our members. So I've just appointed a wine tourism manager. So that's the journey we've been on. It's taken us 3 years. That's really exciting. And the really exciting thing that we tested last year, which we're going to roll out again this year, was the Cellar Door Day. So 250 cellar doors all around the country, and we ran a social media campaign in New Zealand to drive people to those cellar doors and maybe have some specific experiences there. So again, that's a new thing for us. So I wouldn't say been there, done that. Done quite a bit, made a few mistakes, made a lot of mistakes, learnt from them, almost had our members say, hey, why do we need you, New Zealand wine growers? We went through a whole analysis of what is it an industry body should do, and we really narrowed it down, saying these are the things an industry body can do that an individual member can't do. We should never be doing what a member can do. I don't sell wine. That's what our members do. So, but on the theme of been there, done that, what you've got to realise when you've been there and doing it is once you've done it. And 15 years ago, my first press release was for 300 million. Last week was 1.8 billion, $1.5 billion growth in exports in 15 years. It's probably the time to move on. So I'm just moving on now. I've got a job as the head of marketing Austrian wine. And so I'm moving to Europe, to Vienna in a few months. But I still wanted to do this, fulfill this invitation, because I'm a firm believer in your product. I travel all around the world, and people talk to me about New Zealand honey. They tell me how great it is. So I think you've got an awesome product. And if I would just leave you with one message, if I may, is work together. Thank you.